In the 1950s, as the civil rights movement began to take shape, prominent leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer emerged. Hamer's career started in the early 1960s when she took on the responsibility of advocating for voting rights and political accessibility for African Americans. Her contributions had a lasting impact on the civil rights community, giving a voice to the civil and voting rights movement for African Americans, especially amongst Black women, which ultimately contributed to the pursuit of an equal America. The entirety of Hamer's advocacy was forged during the failure of Reconstruction, the era of racial terrorism, and Jim Crow across the Deep South. Although the United States ended the institution of slavery through the Civil War, it failed to ensure true equality for African Americans, particularly in the South. During the era of Reconstruction, the United States struggled to help African Americans participate in politics, business, and other areas of society. The passage of the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed equal protection under the law, and the 15th Amendment, which granted Black men the right to vote, were monumental achievements of this era. However, the promises of Reconstruction were neglected. White Southerners abdicated their responsibility to uphold equality, enforcing Jim Crow laws that violated African Americans' rights by enforcing segregated facilities, schools, and workplaces. These laws also denied African Americans basic rights, such as the ability to marry interracially and vote using tools such as discriminatory literacy tests. This enabled the creation of a separate but not equal society, as ruled in the Supreme Court's failure of responsibility in Plessy v. Ferguson. The result of this continuous discrimination built momentum for the civil rights movement. The first sign of change was when President Harry Truman issued an executive order to end segregation in the military. Additionally, the Supreme Court finally fulfilled its legal responsibility in Brown v. Board of Education, which ruled that school segregation violated constitutional rights. There were many activists who took on the responsibility of securing and continuing the fight for these rights, one of the key figures being Fannie Lou Hamer. Hamer was the youngest of 20 children born to sharecroppers. By the age of 6, she had begun cotton picking, and by 12, she was forced to leave school entirely to continue plantation work. However, despite being put in these unfortunate circumstances, she showed extreme determination for equality at an early age. Hamer became the only worker who could read and write, earning the role of a timekeeper on her plantation. In 1961, in attempts to remove a tumor, Hamer non-consensually received a hysterectomy, which was common in the South, in order to prevent African American childbirth. In 1962, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee went to a church near Hamer's neighborhood and taught attendees how voting can help them gain equality. This influenced Hamer to lead 17 volunteers to register to vote at the Indianola, Mississippi courthouse on August 31, 1962. They were denied the right to vote due to biased literacy tests that favored white people. On their way home, they were harassed and fined $100 for their bus being too yellow. In June of 1963, after successfully completing a voter registration program in Charleston, South Carolina, Hamer and several other Black women were arrested for sitting in a whites-only restaurant in Winona, Mississippi. At the Winona jailhouse, she and several of the women were brutally beaten, leaving Hamer with lifelong injuries such as a blood clot in her eye, kidney damage, and leg damage. Her unwavering attempts to exercise her right to vote illustrate not only her personal determination, but also her broader commitment to ensuring that other people of color would be spared the systematic abuse she experienced in order to practice her fundamental right to vote. In April of 1964, Hamer helped create the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, an alternative to the white and conservative Democratic Party in Mississippi. They later testified in August of 1964 at the Democratic National Convention, arguing that the delegation of the Mississippi Democratic Party be replaced by that of the MFDP to implement Black representation in their government. Hamer herself made a strong testimony questioning America's morals and implied that it's America's responsibility to create a land where everyone is treated equally, no matter their race.
Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings?
President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was otherwise supportive of the MFDP, aired a presidential address at the time of her speech in order to block her testimony on television.
However, this failed to work as the testimony ended up airing on the evening news, reaching a much larger audience than it originally would have. After their testimony at the DNC, due to pressure from Johnson, the Credentials Committee prevented them from completely replacing the MDP. Democratic officials instead offered the MFDP 2 seats. The vice president then made it clear that Johnson would not approve of, quote, that illiterate woman speaking on the floor of the Democratic Convention.
The MFDP rejected the Democrats' offer, with Hamer saying, quote, we didn't come all this way for no 2 seats. She disregarded the president's demeaning actions and continued to fight for the MFDP to be fully represented. Her determination to advocate for black rights was relentless. In 1964 and 1965, she ran for Congress. However, her name was not allowed on the ballot. Although she did not succeed in winning, it strongly depicts her determination to take responsibility of creating the change she wanted to see.
Through Hamer's immediate impacts, she was able to contribute in establishing equality for African Americans by acting on her responsibility to advocate for black rights. Her first major impact was that she helped to co-found the MFDP. In 1964, they aimed to fight for the ability to speak at the Democratic National Convention and argued they should be recognized as the official delegation. Through the organization and Hamer's efforts, the MFDP became a direct cause of the National Party endorsing a new policy, the banning of seat delegations being chosen because of racial discrimination.
This policy then helped persuade the government to enact the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which prohibited the use of unfair voting prerequisites, such as the bias-required literacy test. The act had an immediate impact, as by 1965, roughly 250,000 African American voters were registered. Additionally, Hamer helped organize the Freedom Summer movement, which encouraged white students to protest for black voter registration. The Freedom Summer organization also served as a catalyst for the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Hamer also left a lasting impact on future generations of civil rights activists by setting an example of persevering through even the harshest setbacks. Her efforts in the civil rights movement laid the foundation for future black women to run for Congress and for other black politicians to help advocate for black voices. She presented powerful speeches across the country that swayed the vote to be in favor of removing bias tests, which paved the way for other racially discriminatory processes to be removed from the law.
Her pioneering work in this sector has allowed for African Americans to have equal opportunity in participating in politics today. Her decision to repeatedly run for Congress led to women like Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to run for president, and Kamala Harris, the first person of color to be vice president. The signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which Hamer fought for, led to many conservative whites leaving the Democratic Party to join the more conservative Republican Party. This led to a more united front on the Democratic Party, allowing their movements to be more centered towards African American rights compared to their historically racist past.
Through her unwavering commitment to civil rights, Fannie Lou Hamer proved that achieving fundamental rights requires accepting difficult responsibilities. Due to her exemplary efforts, Hamer was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Biden in 2025. This is the nation's highest civilian order. U.S. Representative for Mississippi's 2nd Congressional District, Benny Thompson, who was a college student that Fannie Lou Hamer recruited to register other black voters, shares, "My life was transformed while working on the Fannie Lou Hamer campaign for Congress. I am deeply influenced by her legacy, and I am honored to witness this recognition. I extend my gratitude to President Biden for acknowledging Hamer's pivotal role in American history and bestowing upon her this well-deserved honor. Because rights such as voting and equal access to resources are fundamental, she actively challenged the injustices that denied African Americans their basic rights. By fighting for voting access and challenging political exclusion, she brought voice to the idea that securing basic rights requires individuals and communities to take responsibility to push for change. Her legacy continues to remind us that the journey towards equality depends on this delicate balance, a lesson that remains relevant in addressing civil rights issues today.